She had the proof. Let that sentence detonate inside you before I say another word. On the night of November 14th, the same night Kang Do-jin stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Han River penthouse, with his back turned and his shoulders rigid like a man who had already delivered his verdict. The same night he placed 3 pages of legal language on a dining table and said, "The photos don't lie, Saren." The same night she pressed her hands flat against that table and whispered, "I'm asking you to listen to me, just once." She already knew the photos were fabricated. 3 days before that night, an anonymous data file had landed in her inbox. Inside it, every piece of evidence Do-jin wouldn't discover for 9 months. The altered timestamps, the IP trace leading to Jiseok's office, the transfer memo proving Gong Tae-yoon was in Busan, not Seoul, the entire architecture of the lie that was about to destroy her marriage, laid bare, dissected, undeniable. She could have stopped the divorce before the pen touched paper. She didn't. And the reason she chose silence over proof, exile over vindication, 9 months of cold rice and convenience store shifts, and a hospital bed in Ansan with none written on the emergency contact line. That reason is inside a sealed white envelope sitting in the top drawer of a kitchen in Pyeongchang-dong. An envelope she wrote on the night of day 9. After the court filing, after she told the most powerful man in Seoul to pick up diapers on his way home, an envelope she still hasn't given him. If you watched part 1, you watched a man lose control in 9 seconds over a cup of tea, brewed at a ratio only one woman in the world had ever gotten right. You watched him find a blue sock in a hallway and hear 3 infant cries behind a locked door. You watched a marriage destroyed by fabricated photographs and a man's refusal to listen for 5 minutes. If you watched part 2, you watched a grandmother in Andong who had known about the triplets for 7 months, who sent paper cranes through a church, whose handwritten letter silenced a courtroom. You watched a network of invisible women, housekeepers, receptionists, bookkeepers, outmaneuver an entire syndicate. You watched a woman walk into a courthouse in a Navy hanbok and kill a 17-year strategist's plan with a folder. But neither chapter told you what was inside that envelope. Subscribe to Aurora Love Saga right now, because this is the final chapter. Every thread pulls tight, every door closes, and the last line of this story will live inside your chest like a second heartbeat long after the screen goes dark. Let's finish this. Day 10. The morning the deadline died or became a door. 5:36 a.m. The earliest he had ever arrived. Earlier than the 5:47 of day 1, when he had walked through the safe house door carrying formula and terror and the willingness to be humbled. Earlier than the 5:39 of day 3, when he was still learning that Min-jae needs upright burping, but Hana needs circular motions on her back. Earlier than the 5:38 of the morning, he carried both sons simultaneously. One in each arm, a geometry he had rehearsed alone in front of a mirror because he refused to let that moment be clumsy. Each morning, a few minutes earlier. As if he could outrun 9 months of absence by arriving before the sun could remind him how many mornings he had already missed. He didn't knock. He didn't need to anymore. She had given him the code on day 7. 4 digits, Hana's birth date, the smallest of the 3, the loudest, the one who had burrowed into the hollow between his shoulder and his jaw on day 4 and gone completely quiet, choosing him before he had earned it, the way biology sometimes overrules the careful mathematics of betrayal. He set the bag down. Formula, diapers, size 2 now, because Hajun had outgrown the ones, and Saren had told him so on the phone the way she told him everything, without sentiment, without warmth, as instruction, rather than invitation. And something new. 3 small plush rabbits he had found at a convenience store at 4 a.m., walking Seoul's empty streets because sleep had become a stranger, and his hands needed something to do besides tremble. He'd bought 3. 1 for each, because Kang Do-jin had learned, slowly, clumsily, irreversibly, that in this room, fairness wasn't strategy. It was survival. Saren was standing by the window, arms crossed, hair down, loose the way it had been on that 2 a.m. night when she opened the staff quarters door, and he saw her for the first time without the maid's uniform, without the mask of Han Jia, without the practiced alias she had maintained so flawlessly that even her left hand, the one she had pressed flat against her thigh with knuckles white as bone, never betrayed her. The safe house kitchen had a single window that faced east, and the first light of Seoul was staining the sky the color of bruised persimmons. Persimmons. The fruit hung in everything now. In Andong, where his mother's tree still stood in the courtyard behind the wooden gate his grandfather had built. In the photograph he had taken years ago, Saren laughing on a visit, holding the fruit up like a trophy, nose red from cold, saying, "Don't you dare send that to anyone," and him saying, "It's just for me." In the new garden of the Pyeongchang-dong house, where a matching tree had been planted but had not yet borne fruit, persimmons had become the connective tissue of this story. The thing that grew in every place they had ever meant something to each other. She didn't turn around. "It's day 10, she said. "I know. You've been here every morning. You learned the feeding schedule. You held your daughter when she screamed at 3 a.m. and you didn't flinch. You signed the paternity papers without reading the fine print. On day 5, with Minji still in the crook of your arm. You sat on this floor and folded laundry with 3 creases. 3 creases. The Kang family fold. The one his mother had taught Saren during Chuseok. The precise way of folding jeon that had been passed down from Dojin's grandmother in Andong. His own sister had never bothered to learn it, but Saren had mastered it in one afternoon, and she was still using it. After the divorce, after the hospital, after the 9 months of invisible war, she had kept the fold the way she had kept the recipe card. The handwritten doenjang jjigae recipe his mother had pressed into her hands with the words, "This is how we feed the people we love." She turned, and her eyes, God, those eyes, the same dark eyes that had once looked at him like he was the entire universe, and then, at the end, like he was a stranger she wished she'd never met. The same eyes that had stared at him across a velvet sitting room in the Choi mansion while she said, "Will there be anything else, ma'am?" Directing her voice at Nara, not at him, flat and professional, the voice of a woman who had trained herself to feel nothing in a room where everything burned. But now those eyes carried something different. Not the fire he had glimpsed in the East Wing hallway when she blocked him at 2 a.m. with a maid's posture and a mother's steel. Not the exhaustion he had seen when she said, "Leave me alone, Dojin. That's what costs something." Not even the armored grief of the woman who had declared, at the garden gate, "Understanding is free. It costs you nothing." Now they carried assessment, the steady measuring gaze of a woman who had spent 10 days watching a pattern form and was deciding, right now, in this room, with the morning light behind her, whether the pattern was real. "I believe the pattern, Dojin." 4 words, and each one landed like a stone into water that had been still for 9 months. But that word, that single syllable, it reversed the current in the room the way a tide pulls back before something enormous arrives. The way the air had reversed in the Choi mansion sitting room when Dojin first lifted a teacup to his lips and tasted chrysanthemum and barley brewed at a ratio no one else had ever gotten right, because no one else had ever stood in a tiny apartment in Mapogu with a kettle that didn't whistle properly, experimenting until she found the one that made him close his eyes. But believing you can show up at 5:36 a.m. with formula is not the same as believing you won't destroy me again. He didn't speak, didn't defend, didn't negotiate. The man who had once made a rival syndicate leader apologize on national television stood with his hands at his sides. No cufflink to adjust, no leather armrest to grip, no velvet chair to sit in like he owned the sky above it, and let her words land unguarded. Trust isn't built in 10 days. Trust is built in 10,000 mornings. And I need you to understand that day 10 is not a finish line. It's a door. And I'm choosing to leave it open. Not because you earned it, but because they... She gestured toward the room where 3 babies slept. the room where paper crane mobiles turned slowly above bassinets lined against the wall, deserve to know who their father can become, not who he was. She unfolded her arms. So, here are my terms. Not a negotiation, a declaration. And this is where you need to understand the magnitude of what you're witnessing. During their marriage, Saren had been the woman who adjusted, who accommodated, who poured tea and attended syndicate galas in burgundy dresses with reluctant half-smiles, who sat beside his mother during Chuseok and served teokguk with grace, who followed rules about rooms she wasn't allowed to enter and questions she wasn't allowed to ask, because asking about everything had been the problem, or so they believed. That woman had died. She had said so herself in the Mapo-gu safe house. The woman you married is gone. She died in a hospital in Ansan. The woman standing here now, the one who had filed court documents that killed a custody motion, who had built an intelligence network from housekeepers and bookkeepers and delivery drivers, who had outmaneuvered Huang Jisiok with a folder and a grandmother's handwriting, was someone Dojin had never met before, and she terrified him, in the best possible way. The house in Pyeongchang-dong, I'll move in, with the children, on one condition: you do not live there, not yet. You come every morning, you leave every night. You earn the room, Dojin. You don't inherit it. Understood. Second, the children's names stay Yoon, not Kang. They will know who their father is, but their identity belongs to me until I decide otherwise. His jaw tightened. The same micro-movement that had appeared in the Choi mansion when Saren poured tea with her left hand hidden behind the pot. When she killed the pinky extension habit from her grandmother's Gyeongju method to protect her alias, and Dojin's jaw had flexed because he realized she knew exactly who he was. The syndicate boss inside him, the man who had branded everything he touched with the Kong name, whose name alone could rearrange the seating chart at any banquet in Gangnam, wanted to argue. But the father who had learned that real authority is given, not taken, swallowed it. Understood. Third, your mother comes to the house. She has earned what you haven't. She held those children from a distance for 7 months with paper cranes and envelopes routed through a church in Gwanak-gu. She held them before you even knew they existed. Her room is ready. Yours is not. Something cracked inside his chest, not the sharp, dramatic crack of November 14th, not the slow, spring ice crack of the night he discovered Ji Seok's fabricated evidence in the encrypted archive. This was different. This was the sound of something finally being allowed to thaw, a frozen thing releasing warmth it had been holding prisoner. She'll be there tomorrow, he said. She's already packed. Saren almost smiled. Almost. The ghost of the expression. The same ghost of a laugh she hadn't let herself finish on day 4 when she said, "Biology is inconvenient," after Hana chose Dojin's shoulder, flickered across her face and vanished. "I know, she called me last night." Of course she did, but this story doesn't end with terms and conditions, because while Saren was setting the architecture of a new life, 60 kilometers across Seoul in an estate in Apgujeong-dong, a man who did not believe in the restraint of old grandfathers was making a decision that would test every wall they'd built. Oh Kyung-tae had received Chairman Yeo's perspective, the message Dojin had earned by sitting across from a 78-year-old man and playing the grandparent card with the precision of someone who understood that in Korean power politics, a grandfather's sentiment carried the weight of a declaration of war without the mess of declaring one. He understood that the Yeo family had withdrawn. He understood that his own father, Chairman Oh Dae-shik, considered the matter closed. But Oh Kyung-tae was 36, and at 36, boundaries drawn by old men looked less like walls and more like suggestions. He had ignored Chairman Yeo, he had ignored his own father, and on the morning of day 10, at the exact hour Saren was delivering her terms in the Mapo-gu safe house, Kyung-tae dispatched 3 men to the address Ji Seok had provided before his one-way flight to Vancouver, the Choi Mansion, Upper Gangnam, the East Wing, the staff quarters. They arrived at 6:15 a.m. black car. No plates. 3 men in dark clothing who moved with the practiced silence of people trained not to protect, but to acquire. They entered through the garden terrace, the same door Dojin had memorized the code to weeks earlier by watching Nara's fingers. They moved through the east corridor, past the abstract art that cost a fortune and communicated nothing, past the spot on the floor where Dojin had once bent down and picked up a small blue knitted sock. Impossibly small, the kind made for a foot that hadn't yet learned to walk, and held it in his palm like a piece of evidence at a crime scene. They reached the staff quarters. The lock gave in 4 seconds, and they found nothing. Empty rooms, bare walls, carpet indentations where 3 bassinets had stood, a single paper crane on the windowsill, the one Choi Nara had missed during her discovery, the one that had told her everything she needed to know about the life hidden beneath her own roof. The children were gone, had been gone for days, moved to the safe house, then to Pyeongchang-dong. 3 relocations in 9 days, each executed with the precision of a woman who had spent 9 months learning that safety was not a place. It was a pace. You stayed ahead. But here's the part that turned Oh Kyung-tae's miscalculation into a catastrophe. Park Soo-jin, the quiet one, age 41, the former bookkeeper for the O Syndicate, who had been discarded with a severance package that insulted 20 years of service. The woman who now drove a floral delivery van, the same van parked twice weekly at the O estate, the same van from which she had mapped every entry point, every camera blind spot, every guard rotation. Because 20 years of bookkeeping had taught her that all systems have patterns, and all patterns have gaps. But Soo-jin hadn't only mapped the blind spots, she had mapped the working cameras too, including the ones at the Choi mansion. She had footage, 3 men, black car, breaking into a private residence at 6:15 a.m., faces clear. The footage reached Saren by 6:32 a.m., and this time, for the first time, Saren didn't handle it alone. She called Dojin, not because she needed him, not the way she had needed no one in Ansan when she'd held 3 newborns under fluorescent lights that buzzed with a frequency that would live in her memory forever. Not the way she had needed no one in Gwanak-gu, eating cold rice with soy sauce on a kitchen floor because she was too exhausted to stand. This call was something different. This was what partnership looked like when it was built on terms instead of dependency. You call not because you can't survive alone, you call because fighting together is a choice, not a surrender. Oh Kyung-tae sent men to the Choi mansion. They found nothing. I have footage. Dojin's response was immediate. The syndicate boss and the father merged into a single voice, the same voice that had once told Jiseok she just survived it, and meant it with every cell in his body. Send the footage to Min-soo. I'll handle the son. But Saren, don't handle the father. Let me. Why? Because Chairman Odeshik is 73 years old and he adores his granddaughter. She's 4. Her name is Yuna. If I show him that his son sent men to a house where 3 infants were sleeping, he won't see a tactical move. He'll see a man who endangered babies. And that man will be his own son. Pause. Grandparents, Saren said quietly. Again. It's the only weapon that works every time. He didn't request a meeting. He did something far more devastating. He sent the footage directly, encrypted, accompanied by a single line. Your son sent 3 men to a house where my infant daughter was sleeping. I am asking you as one grandfather to a future grandfather, is this who the O family has become? No threats, no posturing, no invocation of the NIS file he kept loaded like a final weapon, just fatherhood. The same card he had played with Chairman Yeo in that Bukchon restaurant with cedar walls, where he had poured tea with both hands and bowed deep and real and said, you're a grandfather before you're a chairman, and Chairman O, 73. An empire built on brutality, but a kitchen table covered in his granddaughter's crayon drawings. Watched the footage 3 times, then called his son. Within the hour, Oh Kyung-tae's operational authority suspended. The surveillance van, the black Genesis that had been parked 300 meters from the Choi Mansion gates since 4 a.m., rotating plates through 3 registered numbers every 6 hours, recalled and decommissioned, and a message through the back channel. The O family considers this matter closed. The children are not our concern. They never should have been. 2 families, 2 chairmen, 2 grandfathers who understood, when the performance of power was stripped away, that some things were sacred, not because of honor codes, because they had held their own grandchildren and knew, in the bone-deep way that only grandparents know, that a world where babies become leverage has lost the right to call itself civilized. The wall was complete, not in 10 days, 12, because real walls take longer than promises. But there was one more ghost, one more thread, and it reached from 7,800 kilometers away. Vancouver, 3 weeks after departure. Hwang Ji-seok sat in a rented apartment in Kitsilano, drinking coffee every morning, reading Korean news on his phone, searching for a name that never appeared. The man who had spent 17 years in the crawl space where real power hides, controlling information flow, deciding what reached the boss's desk and what disappeared into shredders, was now, for the first time, unnecessary. And irrelevance, in the syndicate world, was the one sentence from which there was no appeal. He made a phone call to a journalist, a young reporter named Bae Jung-won at a Seoul Daily who had been chasing the Kang syndicate for years. Ji-seok offered everything: organizational structure, territorial maps, financial channels, and buried at the bottom, the triplets, names, ages, mother's identity, the maid's uniform, the mansion, the grandmother, all of it packaged as the human interest angle that would make any front page in Korea. But Ji-seok had miscalculated one variable he had never thought to account for. Moon Yerim, age 29, single mother, night shift receptionist at the Lotte Hotel in Jamsil, where she had tracked Ji-seok's every move for weeks. His room service orders, his burner phones disguised as electronics purchases, his visitors. She had also logged his outgoing calls, including the one from the hotel business center 3 days before his departure, the same Vancouver number now dialing a Seoul journalist. Yerim flagged it within the hour. The message reached Sarin by 9 p.m. through the Korean Domestic Workers Community app, the encrypted channel no intelligence agency in South Korea had ever thought to monitor. The snake called a reporter, Bae Jung-won, Seoul Daily. Sarin read it while sitting in the Pyeongchang-dong kitchen. She looked out the window at the persimmon tree, bare, winter stripped, but carrying in its thick branches the invisible architecture of fruit that hadn't arrived yet. She had 2 obvious options: tell Dojin and let the syndicate machine bury the story, or handle it alone, the way she had handled everything since November 14th. She chose neither. She chose truth. She called Bae Jung-won herself. The cafe was in Insadong, neutral ground. Sarin arrived first, navy coat, hair pulled back, no hanbok. This wasn't a courtroom performance. This was a conversation. Jung-won arrived late, carrying a recorder and the energy of a journalist who believed he was about to get the story of his career. "Before you press that button," Sarin said, her palm flat on the table, the same gesture she had made on the dining table of the Han River penthouse on November 14th, the same gesture Dojin had made in his mother's kitchen in Andong when Myung-hee said, "I know. I need to ask you something. Do you have children? No. Then let me explain what it's like. It's like carrying something inside your chest made of love instead of gunpowder, and every morning it detonates into feeding schedules and the specific terror of watching a 2-month-old breathe and wondering if the next breath will come. You fill out intake forms that ask for an emergency contact, and you write none. You work 3 jobs in your first trimester: cashier, data entry, office cleaner, standing for hours while morning sickness rolls through you in waves you can't show. You eat cold rice with soy sauce on a kitchen floor because you're too exhausted to stand, and you do it alone for 9 months. She opened a folder. Not syndicate evidence, not surveillance photos, medical records, her own. the emergency C-section report from Ansan, the prenatal visits attended alone, the nutritional deficiency diagnosis, the hospital form with none in the emergency contact field. This is the story, Jungwon, not the syndicate, not the power struggle, not the territorial maps Ji-seok offered you, a woman who was thrown away by a man who believed a lie, who carried 3 children to term while working as a cashier and a clerk and a cleaner, who gave birth alone, who became a maid in her replacement's home, and who built a network of invisible women, the kind your sources' world threw away, that outmaneuvered an entire criminal organization. She leaned forward. If you publish Ji-seok's version, the power play the children as leverage, you put 3 infants on the front page as targets. Every rival family, every ambitious underboss in Seoul will know their names and faces. You won't be exposing corruption. You'll be painting a target on sleeping babies. She closed the folder. But if you want a real story, write about the women, the housekeepers who reassembled shredded documents, the receptionists who logged burner phone deliveries, the bookkeepers who mapped camera blind spots from delivery vans. Write about a grandmother who sent paper cranes through a church because her son's world made love dangerous. Write about a mother who refused to be erased. Jungwon looked at the hospital form, at the word none. He left the recorder off. 3 weeks later, a feature appeared in the Seoul Daily's weekend magazine. Not on the front page, not in the crime section, the human interest column. A story about invisible women, about networks built from solidarity, about motherhood as resistance. No syndicate names, no children's faces, no addresses. Just truth, laid bare, without a single weapon. Ji-seok read it in Vancouver and understood, with the particular devastation of a man who had spent his life controlling narratives, that the woman he'd tried to erase had written her own. He closed his phone, looked out at English Bay. The water was gray. The coffee in his hand had gone cold the way coffee goes cold when a man reads something that makes him forget he is holding anything at all. He thought about calling someone, but every name in his phone was a function, every relationship a utility. 17 years of being indispensable, not a single day of being loved. That was the sentence. Not exile, not exposure, irrelevance. The specific permanent silence of a life that no longer matters to anyone. And that was the last time Hwang Ji-seok appeared in this story. Not with a bang, not with a final scheme, with a quiet click of a phone screen going dark and the reflection of a man who had nothing left to manipulate staring back at him. Day 12. The Pyeongchang-dong house. Kang Myung-hee arrived from Andong with 2 suitcases, a pot of doenjang jjigae made from the recipe she had once written on a card and pressed into Serin's hands during Chuseok. This is how we feed the people we love, and the quiet, unshakable authority of a woman who had waited 7 months to hold her grandchildren and was done waiting. The nursery was ready, 3 bassinets against the wall, the paper crane mobile turning slowly in the draft from the window, the same mobile Dojin had seen on the night he first entered the staff quarters of the Choi mansion, the night the door opened from the inside and Serin stood there with her hair loose for the first time, wearing a worn cotton shirt and dark circles carved under her eyes, a burp cloth over one shoulder. The mobile he had assumed Serin had folded herself during the 3rd trimester, fingers swollen, sitting on the floor of the Gwanak apartment at 2 a.m. But Serin hadn't folded those cranes. His mother had. Myung-hee had sent them through the church in Gwanak-gu, anonymously alongside monthly envelopes of money and hand-knitted blankets, because her son's world made direct contact dangerous. 7 months of cranes, 7 months of love disguised as anonymous charity. A retired school teacher in Andong who had never held a weapon, never signed a contract worth more than a few million won, never commanded a single person, doing more to protect 3 children than an entire syndicate empire. She stopped in the nursery doorway. Her hand found the frame, and for the first time in Dojin's memory, This man who had watched his mother wear white for a week after the divorce was announced. Not funeral white, but the white of a woman in mourning for something that should have lived, who had watched her face collapse when he told her Saren was unfaithful, not in anger but in the specific Korean pain of a mother who raised her son to be better. For the first time, her composure cracked, not violently, the way a dam cracks, from the sheer accumulated pressure of holding too much for too long. Hajun was awake, the eldest by 4 minutes, the diplomat, the one who slept through everything and had apparently decided that not every crisis required his attention. His dark eyes tracked the paper cranes above him with focused calm. Eomeonim, Saren said softly. And that word, the Korean word for mother-in-law that carries within it a lifetime of respect and belonging and the specific bond between a woman and the mother of the man she chose, broke the dam entirely. Myung-hee didn't reach for the babies first. She reached for Saren, pulled her into an embrace so fierce that Hana, still on Saren's hip, squeaked in protest, and held her, the woman her son had thrown away, the woman who had called her from a public hospital in Ansan 3 days after an emergency C-section and said, "Eomeonim, I know you may not believe me, but these are your grandchildren, and I wanted you to know they exist, even if you never see them." "I'm sorry," Myung-hee whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't stop him. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry the cranes were all I could send when what you needed was arms." "The cranes were enough, Eomeonim," Saren said, and her voice, the voice that had been steel for 9 months, that had delivered courtroom filings and maid service dialogue and the words, "I am the support," to a doctor who asked if she had help at home, trembled. Just once. Just enough. Myung-hee stepped back, wiped her eyes, and then she wept. Not politely, not with restraint, the way she had wanted to weep for 7 months while standing in her Andong kitchen, folding paper cranes alone, sealing church envelopes, carrying the weight of 3 grandchildren she could feel but couldn't hold. Saren placed Hajun in her arms, and the sound, a low, trembling exhale that carried within it every cradle song, every Chuseok memory, every doenjang jjigae recipe pressed into the hands of a daughter-in-law she refused to stop loving, filled the nursery like a frequency only family can produce. Hajun's hand, tiny, uncoordinated, guided by nothing but instinct, reached toward her cheek and touched the tear. Myung-hee laughed, broken, beautiful. "He has your father's hands," she said to Dojin, who was standing in the doorway, unable to enter because his legs had stopped working. He remembered his mother's words in the Andong kitchen. "What you owe them is the rest of your life lived differently. Can you do that?" And his answer, "I'm trying." And hers, "Try harder." "Iama," he whispered. The word came out the way it used to when he was 9 and had broken something he couldn't fix. "Don't," she said gently, "the way you tell someone not to apologize when the apology is too small for the wound. Don't say sorry. Say hello to your son." He entered, sat beside his mother on the floor. Hana woke screaming. Of course she did. And he lifted her with neck supported, grip steady, no trembling, and she burrowed into the hollow between his shoulder and his jaw, the space where heartbeats live, the space she had chosen on day 4 when Saren said, "She doesn't do that with strangers." And he'd asked what it meant, and she'd answered, "It means biology is inconvenient." And for the first time, 3 generations of the Kang family existed in the same space. Not as a dynasty, not as a syndicate legacy, as a family, messy, broken, rebuilding, human. Myung-hee looked at Serene across the bassinets, across the months and the cranes and the letters and the kitchen drawer envelope that still hadn't been opened, and the look said, "He's learning. He's slow, but he's learning." Saren nodded, almost imperceptibly. Then Myung-hee said something that landed in the room like a seed in waiting soil. "The envelope, Serena, it's time." Saren didn't react immediately. She finished changing Minjae, folded the cloth, 3 precise creases, the Kang family fold, placed it in the basket, straightened her back. Then she walked to the kitchen, opened the top drawer, took out the envelope. She returned to the nursery, held it in both hands, the proper Korean gesture of offering something important, and extended it toward Dojin. I wrote this on the night of day 9, after the court filing, after I told you to pick up diapers, after everything. He took it. Light, 1 page, but it carried the weight of something he could feel in his fingers, the way the blue sock had felt in his palm in the East Wing hallway, like evidence at a crime scene. He opened it. He read, and the room went silent. Not the tense silence of the Choi Mansion sitting room, not the empty silence of the penthouse after Saren left, not the loaded silence of the nursery at 2 a.m. when he had asked, "Whose children?" And she had answered, "Mine." This was the silence of a man encountering a truth so large his entire body needed a moment to make room for it. Dojin, if you are reading this, it means you came back. It means you showed up at 5:36 a.m. with formula and diapers and the willingness to sit on a nursery floor and learn what I learned alone. But I need you to know something that will change the way you see every moment of our story. I had the proof. On the night of November 14th, the night you stood near the window with your back turned and your shoulders carrying the posture of a man who had already made his verdict, the night you placed divorce papers on our dining table beside a pen and said, "The photos don't lie, Saren." I already knew they didn't, because they weren't real. 3 days before that night, I received a data file. Inside it, the original metadata showing altered timestamps. The IP trace linking the fabricated hotel booking to Ji-Suk's office. The transfer memo proving Gong Tae-yoon was in Busan, not Seoul. Everything you discovered 9 months later in that encrypted archive, I had it before you asked me to sign. I could have fought. I could have placed that file beside your divorce papers and watched your certainty collapse in real time. I could have called your mother, your lawyers, your counsel. I could have defended myself with evidence so clean it would have ended Ji-Seok that night and saved us 9 months of destruction. I didn't, because Dojin, and this is the part that will hurt, and I need it to hurt, because you need to carry this. A wife should not need a file to be believed. I stood in front of you. I looked into your eyes. I said, "I have never." And you chose a photograph over my face. You chose timestamps over 3 years of mornings. You chose Hwang Ji-Seok's word over the woman who had memorized your T ratio and folded your mother's John and stayed through every locked room and every silent dinner, and every night you came home smelling like a world you wouldn't let me enter. I left because a man who requires evidence to believe his wife has already stopped being her husband. I signed those papers not because I was guilty. I signed them because your doubt was a verdict no file could overturn. I kept the proof. I carried it through Gwanak-gu and the convenience store and the data entry basement and the hospital in Ansan, through every 2 a.m. feeding and every clinic form that asked for an emergency contact and got none. I could have used it at any moment, to reclaim my name, to demand alimony, to destroy Ji-Seok myself. I chose not to, because I needed to know if you would find the truth on your own, not because someone handed it to you, not because a file made it undeniable, but because you looked at the world you'd built on a lie and felt, in your own chest, without evidence, without proof, without anything except the memory of who I was, that something was wrong. You did. You found it. Not as fast as I would have liked, but you found it. And then you came to a nursery at 2 a.m. and asked, "Whose children?" And I saw something in your eyes that wasn't authority or control or the cold machinery of a man who runs an empire. I saw doubt, real doubt, the kind that cracks a man open. That is why I gave you 10 days, not because you asked, because you doubted yourself. And a man who doubts himself is a man who might someday learn to trust someone else. This letter is not forgiveness. Forgiveness is not a document. It's a ratio, like tea. It takes time to find, and when you find it, you'll know. Not because I say the words, because the taste will be right. I came back, Dojin, not for you, for them, and for the version of you that I believed existed somewhere underneath the man who threw me away. Prove me right, Saren. He read it 3 times. Each reading carved the words deeper, not into memory, but into the architecture of who he understood himself to be. Every assumption from November 14th, every late-night justification in the penthouse overlooking the Han River. Every morning he didn't show up. She had the proof. She had always had the proof. And she chose to leave because proof shouldn't have been necessary. Because a husband who needs a file to trust his wife was never really a husband. He set the letter down, looked at Saren, looked at his mother, who was holding Hajun with the practiced ease of a woman who had raised children with no manuals, only instinct and stubborn love. You knew, the whole time. Yes, you could have stopped the divorce. Yes, you chose not to. I chose to let you decide who you were without my evidence making the decision for you. If I had shown you that file, you would have believed the data. I needed you to believe me. Silence, the kind that rewrites a man from the inside out. Do you? She asked. Believe me, not the file, not the metadata, me, my face, my voice, the woman standing in front of you saying, I have never. Do you believe that woman? He looked at her, and for the first time, without documents, without investigation, without the scaffolding of evidence his entire life had been built upon, he answered with the raw, unprotected truth of a man who had been broken open and was choosing to stay that way. I believe you. I should have believed you that night, and I will spend whatever life I have left making sure you never have to prove anything to me again. Myung-hee pressed her face against Ha-jun's hair, hiding tears, because Korean mothers of her generation did not cry in front of their sons. They cried into the hair of their grandchildren where tears could become something useful, a blessing or a promise. Saren took the letter back, folded it, 3 creases, the Kong family fold, and placed it in the drawer where it had waited, not destroyed, kept, because some truths are too important to throw away, even after they've done their work. The women, Jang Eun-ji, the housekeeper who reassembled shredded documents in the Yo estate with a party trick her ex-husband never imagined would become a weapon, left domestic service. Saren connected her with a legal aid nonprofit. She now reconstructs destroyed evidence for domestic abuse cases in an office with windows. Moon Yerim, the receptionist who tracked Jaseok's every burner phone, was offered a position in Dojin's legitimate business arm. She declined. She took a daytime job at a children's hospital in Songpa-gu, home by 6 p.m. every night. She has never worked a night shift again. Park Soo-jin, the quiet one, the bookkeeper, the delivery van driver, opened a small bookkeeping firm in Mapo-gu for single mothers and women re-entering the workforce. Her first client was Saren. Her second was Nara. Yes, Nari. Choi Nara left the Gangnam mansion the week after she sat on the floor of the empty staff quarters and understood, with devastating clarity, that she had never been a contender. She had been a stage set. She enrolled in a gallery management program she had deferred for years because it didn't align with the image of a woman auditioning for a syndicate boss's arm. She kept the paper crane, the one from the windowsill. She placed it on the shelf above her desk, between an art history textbook and a small cactus. She wasn't a villain. She was a woman who played by the rules of a world that treated women as decorative strategy, and lost to a woman who refused to play those rules at all. The cruelty wasn't that she lost. It was that she was never in the competition she thought she was in. And the paper crane, that small, impossible thing, folded at 2 a.m. by swollen hands in a Gwanak-gu apartment, sat on that shelf like proof that one woman's survival can become another woman's permission to start over. Autumn, 6 months after day 10, the persimmon tree in the Pyeongchang-dong garden bore fruit for the first time. Saren discovered it on a Sunday morning, carrying Hana on her hip. The posture so natural now it had become part of her body's geometry. The fruit hung heavy on the branches, orange, luminous. The same variety as the tree in Andong, the one behind the wooden gate his grandfather had built and his mother refused to replace. Some things should stay standing so they can witness who comes back. She reached up, picked one, held it up. Not like a trophy this time, like a homecoming. Dojin was in the kitchen doorway, 5:36, the time that had become his signature, his proof, his daily pattern, laid at the altar of a woman who said she didn't believe promises. She believed patterns. He took the photograph. She turned, saw the phone, and her face did something it hadn't done in over a year. Something that started at the corners of her mouth and moved upward until her cheeks bunched and her eyes nearly disappeared. The real smile, the one that lived behind every wall and had been waiting for a morning safe enough to come out. "Don't you dare send that to anyone," she said. The exact words, from years ago, from the Andong visit with the red nose and the cold and the fruit, held up like a prize. He lowered the phone, looked at her, at Hana, at the persimmon, at the tree that carried the ghost of Andong in its branches and the promise of this new life in its fruit. "It's just for us," he said. She held his gaze. 3 seconds. The same 3 seconds from the Mapo-gu safe house, when she had rested her head on his shoulder and then straightened because Yoon Saren was not a woman who leaned for long, but this time she didn't straighten. She stayed. 1 year later. Winter light through the kitchen window, the persimmon tree outside, bare again, stripped by the season, carrying the invisible weight of fruit that will come. Saren pours tea into 2 cups, chrysanthemum and barley, 60-40, the ratio she found in a tiny apartment in Mapo-gu with a kettle that didn't whistle, experimenting until she got the one that made him close his eyes and say, "That one, that's it." She had smiled like she'd won something. He remembered that smile now. It didn't cut anymore. It healed. She sets 1 cup in Dojin's place. He is already there, sitting in the chair that became his, not because he claimed it, but because she placed a cup beside it every morning until the chair became his, through the slow, sacred arithmetic of repetition. He picks up the cup, takes a sip, closes his eyes. The same gesture, the same response, from the very first time, the one that started everything. He opens his eyes. "Dojin." "There's a room at the end of the hall. It's been empty since we moved in." His heart, the one that once operated like a machine, calculating leverage and territory and control, beats with a rhythm learned from 6 a.m. alarms and 37-degree bottles, and a daughter who chose his shoulder before he earned it, and a grandmother who sent paper cranes through a church, and a letter that said a wife should not need a file to be believed. "Are you? The room is yours, if you want it." Not a proposal, not a grand gesture. A room, a door, a key that had been waiting in her hand since the day he gave her the house and told her the lock answered to no one but her. She was giving it back. Not the key, the choice. "I want it," he said, quietly, the way a man speaks when the most important sentence of his life requires no volume. She nodded, set her cup beside his, and walked toward the nursery where 3 children were beginning to stir. Hana's sharp cry first, then Min-jae joining in duet, then Ha-jun sleeping through it all, the future diplomat who had already decided not every crisis required his attention. Somewhere in the house, Myung-hee was singing a trot song from the 1970s, teaching Ha-jun to clap. He wasn't good at it. She didn't care, because grandmothers understand that the destination doesn't matter. The warmth of the journey does. And Kong Dojin sat alone at the kitchen table for 1 more moment. Tea cooling, winter light on his hands. He pressed his palms flat against the surface. The same gesture Saren had made on November 14th, the same gesture he had made in Andong. But his palms were not pressing down to keep the world from collapsing. They were pressing down to feel it, to confirm that this surface, this morning, this life, was real. Was his, was something he had not destroyed beyond repair. The taste, chrysanthemum, barley, 60-40, exactly right. The way it had always been, the way it would be tomorrow and the morning after that and every morning for the rest of a life that had finally learned what it was for. Not power, not control, not empire. Just this, a cup, a chair, a room at the end of the hall, and the woman who poured. If this story sat inside your chest and refused to leave, if the letter broke you, if the persimmon brought you back, if the 60-40 ratio became something more than tea, then you felt exactly what this story was built to make you feel. This is the end. Not of the channel, not of the sagas, but of this story. The one about a man who lost everything because he trusted the wrong voice, and a woman who survived everything because she trusted herself. Drop a comment below. Tell me, which moment in this final chapter hit you hardest? The letter? The revelation that Saren had the proof all along and chose silence because a wife should not need a file to be believed? The grandmother, holding Hajin for the first time, 7 months of paper cranes finally becoming arms around a baby, touching the tear on her cheek? The persimmon, the same tree, the same fruit, the same photograph, but a different woman holding it. Or the room at the end of the hall, offered not as forgiveness, but as the most powerful word in any language. Stay? Tell me. I read every single one. Subscribe to Aurora Loves Saga. Hit that bell. Share this with someone who needs to know that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it pours tea at 5:36 a.m. and waits for the man it loved to become someone worth staying for. This was the story of the 60-40 ratio, and it ends the way all real love stories end. Not with a kiss, not with a ring, not with words spoken in grand, sweeping declarations, with a cup placed beside a chair, every morning, without being asked. That is the whole love story, right there. I'll see you in the next saga.